My ex at our custody exchange claimed her new guy was family, the room froze, and a clinic emergency contact. Mismatch threw paternity doubt into the air just as my lawyer started writing notes fast. The paper that started it was already in my daughter's backpack before I said a word to my ex. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to the elementary pickup curb for custody exchange. Ava was still buckling and unbuckling the side clips on her lunch bag in the back seat, and Melissa was standing near the passenger door with her new guy half a step behind her, one hand on the roof like he belonged there. She had been calling him family for 3 months in that careful, over-casual tone people use when they know the title is doing too much work. I hadn't fought her on it because custody makes you stupid if you waste every exchange on pride. You pick the things that matter. You save your energy for judges, schedules, school forms, who picked up late, who missed medication, who texted through the parenting app, and who suddenly switched to phone calls when they wanted deniability. I reached into Ava's bag for the weekly reading folder and felt an extra sheet folded in with the school notices. Clinic logo at the top. Pediatric urgent care we had used twice before. I opened it because parents open whatever comes home in the backpack. That's how these things work. And halfway down the intake copy, under emergency contact, Melissa's name was listed first. Under second emergency contact, instead of mine, was Daniel Mercer. Not me, not grandfather, not aunt, not school backup, Daniel Mercer. The room did not literally exist, not the way the title people always imagine when they say the room froze. We were at a curb under a line of sycamores with second graders dragging art projects and crossing guards blowing whistles. But the moment I read that name, the whole strip of sidewalk seemed to go still in the way public places do when your body knows something has shifted before anyone else has admitted it. I said, "Why is Daniel on Ava's clinic form?" Melissa's face changed before Daniel's did. That mattered more. She had been smiling at Ava over something in the back seat. The smile dropped clean off, like she had lost track of which version of the day she was already performing. Daniel stayed where he was, trying on calm. That also mattered. Calm is easy when a question is administrative. It gets harder when the question lands near blood. Melissa said, "It was urgent care. I just put who was with me." I looked back at the paper. Ava had gone in for a fever 2 Saturdays ago, the same Saturday Melissa told me she was taking her to get checked because family was helping and I did not need to leave work early. I remembered the date because I'd spent half that afternoon staring at my phone in the loading dock behind the restaurant, waiting for an update that took too long to come. "You put him above me," I said. "Don't do that here." That was her first instinct. Not explanation, location. Daniel finally spoke. "Man, it was intake. They just needed someone there." I looked at him then. "I wasn't talking to you." Ava had stopped moving in the back seat, not scared exactly, alert. Kids know the weather before adults admit it's raining. She hugged the reading folder against her chest and stared out between our seats at the windshield, like if she kept her eyes forward hard enough, nobody would make her choose a parent tone. Melissa reached for the paper. I folded it once and kept it in my hand. "It's a form," she said. "Not a DNA test." I laughed once, and I hated the sound of it because it came out flatter than I felt. Interesting thing to say before I said anything. That got her. Daniel shifted his weight off the car roof and took a half step back, which should have helped him look less planted and only made him look guiltier. Maybe unfairly. Maybe he was just smart enough to realize a curb full of kids was not the place to square up. That was the trouble from the start. Nothing about the form proved what the ugliest part of my brain wanted to do with it. It proved that on a child medical document tied to my daughter, my place had been quietly rearranged. That alone was enough to humiliate me in public. The rest came rushing in because Melissa panicked exactly the wrong way. She said, too quickly, "Daniel has been there more consistently than you lately." There it was, the second bad turn. Not because it was true. Maybe in a narrow scheduling sense, it even was. I had picked up extra shifts. I had swapped 2 weekends when my manager lost a cook and 1 server quit on the same Friday. I had missed 1 school assembly because Melissa texted me the wrong start time and acted like that was a misunderstanding instead of what it felt like. a test she could later narrate as another example of me being unreliable. But more consistently than you was not a defense for why my daughter's urgent care form had another man sitting where I was supposed to be. I said, "He is your boyfriend. He is not Ava's second parent." Melissa lowered her voice into the register she saves for trying to sound mature in front of strangers. Nobody said he was. The clinic form did. It was contact priority. Why? She glanced at Daniel. Tiny. Fast. I still saw it. That was when I noticed the woman standing 10 feet off the curb with the Navy legal pad. My lawyer, Brenda, had told me she might stop by the exchange if she got out of family court early because we were already fighting over summer schedule modifications, and Melissa had started pushing this language about family support into support. Messages she never would have dared send 6 months earlier. Brenda had said she didn't want to insert herself unless necessary. But once she saw the paper in my hand and Melissa's face, she uncapped her pen and started writing without coming closer. Authority pressure does not always look like a judge or a cop. Sometimes it looks like the one person nearby who knows how to turn a bad sentence into a line item later. Melissa saw her too. Her whole posture tightened. "Why is she here?" she said. I almost smiled. "You want me to answer fast or accurately? Don't be cute. I'm not the one who brought a clinic mismatch to a custody exchange." Daniel said, "Can we calm this down?" Again. Him. Again. Wrong. A crossing guard called for the next line of cars to move up. Nobody in ours moved. The whistle blast cut across the curb, and even Ava flinched. Soft shift. School noise, idling engines, teachers ushering kids past the flagpole, while the 3 adults at one sedan negotiated which family fiction was still viable in daylight. Melissa bent toward the back seat and said to Ava, "Honey, can you give me 1 second?" Ava didn't answer. She just looked at me in the mirror. That was the moment it stopped being just about the form and became something uglier in the air. Not a direct accusation, not yet, but the shape of one. Daniel on the emergency contact line. Daniel already in the car. Daniel being called family. Melissa trying to shrink a document back into clerical nonsense while my lawyer wrote down every beat of silence. I kept my voice low because if I raised it, Melissa would get the thing she always wanted most in public. A version of me that looked less stable than the paper in my hand. "How long?" I asked. "Have you been putting him where I'm supposed to be?" Melissa stared at me like the question itself was indecent. Then she said the one line that made the whole curb go colder. "If you're about to make this about paternity again, that says more about you than me." I had never actually said the word. That was the part that kept replaying first when I thought back on it later. Not the form, not Daniel standing there with his hand on my car like he paid insurance on it. Not even Brenda writing on her legal pad without stepping in. It was Melissa jumping to paternity before I did. If she had said contact list, if she had said intake mistake, if she had even said I was being dramatic over paperwork, maybe the curb would have stayed in the territory of ordinary custody ugliness. But the second she said paternity again, she did 2 things at once. She told me she knew exactly where the form pointed, and she told everybody within earshot that this was not the first time the anxiety existed in our marriage. Brenda kept writing. That bothered Melissa more than it bothered me. I said, "Interesting word choice." Melissa folded her arms, but she kept her body angled toward Ava's side of the car, like she wanted the posture of a mother still mid-exchange, instead of a woman cornered by her own paperwork. "No, what's interesting is you standing here with a lawyer like you plan to start something," Daniel muttered. "Melissa, not a warning to stop, a warning to tidy up." I heard the difference. I ignored him. "Why did you say again?" She looked at me hard. "Because this is what you do when you feel cut out. You make it uglier." That would have landed better if she hadn't already stepped on the word herself. Now it sounded like backfill, like she was building a bridge under her own mistake while I watched. Ava shifted in the back seat and pressed the reading folder flatter against her lap. I hated that. More than the form, more than Daniel's voice, more than Brenda's note-taking. Kids know when adults have changed topics without telling them. The car smelled like sunscreen, old crackers, and the sick, sweet edge of the juice pouch she'd punctured in her bag earlier. It should have been just another exchange. Backpack, lunchbox, medicine reminder, see you Monday. Instead, I was standing there with a clinic sheet in my hand, and my ex had just turned an emergency contact line into something biological, Melissa said, softer now. Can we not do this with her right there? That was the first useful sentence, she'd said. And because it was useful, I noticed how late it came. I looked at Brenda. She did not step forward. Good. Smart. Her presence mattered more if she stayed at the edge, neutral enough to be a witness, not active enough to be framed as ambush. Melissa knew it too. I could see her recalculating how every sentence would sound if repeated later in a conference room with fluorescent lights and a hearing officer who had not been there to smell the heat off the pavement. I folded the clinic copy again, slower this time. Then answer the paperwork, I said. Why is he second contact? Melissa rubbed at the side of her wrist. Tiny move. She always does that when she is about to say something technically true in the least honest way available. Because he was with me, she said. Because you weren't reachable. I almost laughed. I answered in 7 minutes. It felt longer with a fever. Then put my name second and his as with us today. You know how forms work, Daniel said. They were rushing her. Again. Him. I turned just enough to make him feel it. You keep helping like you're already in the paperwork. His jaw tightened. Not enough to fight. Enough to resent me for saying the quiet part too close to the truth, Melissa said. Daniel was handling the front desk while I was with Ava. Then why does the form list him as emergency contact and relationship as family? That shut everybody up for a second. Because relationship had been on the form too. Not just the name, not just the number. Family. Typed cleanly in the clinic copy under his line. Melissa's eyes flashed. She had forgotten I'd seen that. It was easier, she said. For who? For intake. Family was easier than boyfriend. For a kid with a fever, yes. That was plausible enough to be dangerous. I could imagine it. Harried front desk. Insurance card half out of the wallet. Child shivering. A receptionist asking, and his relationship to the patient? And Melissa choosing the smoother word. Because smooth words get you out of medical waiting rooms faster. But plausible is not the same as harmless, especially when the word chosen quietly shifts another adult man toward your child in front of institutions. I said, he is not family to her in a clinic. Melissa's face changed then. Not guilty exactly. Defensive in a way I knew too well. He helps. He shows up. He was there. That line landed because it had enough truth in it to hurt. Daniel did show up. Too much, maybe. More than I liked, certainly. He had started appearing at soccer drop-off, at the school carnival, at the pharmacy pickup, when Ava had strep in March. Always carrying something, always helpful, always one step into the frame farther than I thought he had earned. I had told myself not to overread it because courts love the adult who looks threatened by help. And because, if I'm honest, part of me never knew whether I was reacting to him or to the version of myself Melissa had spent the last year sketching for everyone else. Late, distracted, shift-bound, replaceable. If someone later said I came to that curb already primed to feel displaced, they would not be entirely wrong, I said. Showing up does not get him my line. Ava finally spoke from the back seat. Can I go now? All three of us turned toward her at once. That might have been the worst moment of the exchange. Not the accusation. Not the form. The simple fact that my daughter had asked permission to escape like we were three teachers arguing over her in the office. Melissa's whole voice changed when she answered, 1 minute, baby? Brenda took 2 slow steps closer but still didn't interrupt. Legal pressure again. Just by existing. Melissa watched her approach and then looked back at me. And I could see the next move forming before she said it. Not because I'm psychic. Because co-parents learn each other's strategy, voices like weather patterns. You want to know why I put him? She asked. Because every time something urgent happens, you start asking questions that make the actual emergency harder. There it was. The character attack version. Not I was wrong, but I was difficult under pressure. Not Daniel was too much, but I was less usable. That is how leverage works in custody conflicts. The parent who makes things administratively smoother starts looking morally steadier. And once that picture sticks, Every document begins tilting the same way. I kept my voice flat. So this was punishment? No. Then what? Reality. That one bothered me more than it should have. Because reality is what people say when they want their choice to sound inevitable instead of chosen. A school aide waved another car forward. The sedan behind me honked once, not angrily, just enough to remind us the curb did not care about our private implosion. Soft shift. Car line pressure, street motion, public clock ticking while the most important question on the paper remained unanswered. I said, "Why family?" Melissa looked at Daniel first. Tiny glance. Fast enough to miss if I hadn't been waiting for it. Then she said, "Because that's how Ava understands him." I stared at her. That was worse than intake convenience. Worse than he was there. Because now she was claiming my daughter's mind as cover. And maybe she was right. Kids do absorb titles, adults normalize. Ava might well have started thinking of Daniel that way because Melissa had been teaching her to. But saying it out loud at a custody exchange, with my lawyer listening and a clinic mismatch in my hand, turned it into something sharper. A claim to narrative territory around my own child. I said, "Do not put her mouth on your paperwork." Melissa's face went hard. "Do not stand there and imply my child is somehow not yours because I used the wrong box during urgent care." I hadn't said that either, which meant she was still answering a fear louder than my actual words. And the second time someone rushes to deny the biological question before you put it on the table, the paper in your hand starts weighing a lot more. I glanced at Brenda. She wasn't writing now. She was listening. And that was when Melissa made the mistake that moved the whole thing from ugly to dangerous. She said, "If you drag this into court, I will explain exactly how long you ignored what was obvious." That line sat there for a second because it sounded bigger than the curb. Not louder. Bigger. "If you drag this into court, I will explain exactly how long you ignored what was obvious." Daniel turned toward Melissa so fast it almost looked like he had been waiting all morning for her to stop talking and had still been caught off guard when she did. Brenda's pen moved again. Ava went completely still in the back seat. And me? I just looked at Melissa and let the silence do some of the work for me. Because obvious was the kind of word that only helps if everybody already agrees on what it points to. At an elementary pickup curb, with a clinic form folded in my hand, and another man listed as family under my daughter's emergency contacts, obvious could mean 10 different things, and 6 of them were worse than anything I had actually said. I asked, "Obvious to who?" Melissa pressed her lips together. That was always her tell. Not guilt exactly. Compression. The moment where she decided whether she still had room to edit the truth or whether she had already let too much of it out in a form someone else could later quote. "To you," she said. "That's interesting, since you keep answering questions I haven't asked." Daniel said low, "Melissa, stop." Again, not stop because she was protecting me or Ava or even herself. Stop because she was bleeding precision in front of Brenda. Melissa swung toward him with a look that said he had lost the right to manage her tone 2 sentences ago. Then she turned back to me. "You want the form answer?" "Fine," she said. "I put him because he was there, because he knows the medication list, because the clinic was moving fast, and because lately you don't hear things unless they hit you in the face." That last part was unnecessary, which meant it was probably the truest thing she had said to me all day. At least from her point of view. I could have denied it. I didn't. Because part of what made the whole exchange so poisonous was that she was not fully wrong. I had been slow on some things. Not school pickups, not support, but signs, language. The way Daniel had gone from "my friend from church league" to "he's helping with the house" to "Ava already knows him" to "he's family," in a span that should have alarmed me sooner than it did. If someone later said I had been minimizing because the alternative was uglier than I could afford while we were already fighting over custody, I would not be able to call them a liar. I said, "Then say the obvious part plainly." Melissa stared at me. The crossing guard blew the whistle again. A teacher walked 3 kids past the hood of my car without looking in, which was the decent thing to do and somehow made me hate the public setting even more. Soft shift. Same curb, same paper, But the strip of time had narrowed. School pickup was moving around us. Real life kept ordering children into lines while the adults at one sedan quietly cut into each other's futures. Melissa lowered her voice. "You have been doing this since last winter." "Doing what?" "Looking at Ava like you're checking for somebody else." The sentence hit me hard enough that for a second I forgot Brenda, Daniel, the curb, all of it, because that was cruel. Also because it was half true in a way I hated. Not literally checking features like some bad TV plot. Nothing that theatrical. But there had been moments, little ones. Ava laughing with her head thrown back while Daniel stood too close at a soccer game. Melissa brushing off my questions about timelines around the end of our marriage with that tired contempt she uses when she thinks I am late to my own reality. The fever visit form now. Melissa knew I had questions in me I had not fully voiced, and she knew exactly how humiliating it was to drag them into daylight before I had chosen the language myself. I kept my face as still as I could. "So you've known." Melissa's eyes flicked toward Ava in the mirror and back. "I've known you've been building this in your head." That is not an answer. It's the only one you're going to get at the curb. There it was again. Location, timing, delay. Her favorite tools when facts start turning sharp. But the problem with delay is that it only works when the room still believes you are protecting something other than yourself. Brenda was writing. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear into the school brick. Ava was listening, no matter how hard she pretended not to be. Delay had already lost. I looked at Daniel. "How long have you been at medical appointments?" He exhaled once through his nose. A couple. When Melissa needed help. "You answer real fast for a guy who's just there," Melissa snapped. "He's there because somebody has to be." Brenda's pen stopped, then started again. That line had teeth. Not because it was new, because she said it in front of the lawyer instead of saving it for email where she could later call it frustration. "Somebody has to be" is the kind of sentence that enters custody files wearing work boots. I said, "You want to run that back?" "No." "Good," Ava whispered from the back. "Mom." All three of us looked at her. Her eyes were shiny now, not fully crying, just close enough to make every adult sentence sound filthier. Melissa softened immediately in the way she always does for Ava, which only made the rest of her feel harder. She bent slightly toward the window. "It's okay, baby." No, it wasn't. That was the problem. We were all speaking in two layers now. The surface layer for the child, the real layer for the adults. And Melissa had already made the real layer radioactive by introducing obvious and then trying to hide behind the curb. I made the first real choice of the exchange then. I handed the clinic copy to Brenda without taking my eyes off Melissa. "Can you hold this?" Brenda took it and said only, "Yes." Authority pressure shifted instantly. The paper was no longer just in my hand at the curb. It was in a legal hand. Melissa saw that and went pale in a way she was trying very hard not to show. "You are unbelievable," she said. "No," I said. "You used a child medical form to move another man into a line that belongs to me and then threatened court when I asked why. That is not what happened." "Then give me the version that helps you." Daniel spoke again, too carefully now. "Nobody moved anybody anywhere." I looked at him. "Relationship," says family. That was intake. "You're really hiding behind a receptionist," Melissa cut in. "Because this is not about a receptionist. This is about you waiting for something you could weaponize." That landed because it might have been true too. Not in the cartoon sense. I did not come to the curb, hoping for a paternity document to fall out of Ava's backpack. But yes, I had been waiting for something. Some clean mistake that would let me stop feeling crazy for noticing how Daniel's presence kept expanding while Melissa kept insisting I was overreading. The clinic copy gave me that opening, and Melissa could see I knew it. I said, "You think I wanted this on a school curb? I think you want certainty more than you want peace." Interesting from the person who wrote family, Daniel ran a hand over the back of his neck. He was losing the calm now. Good. Calm had been serving him too well. "Man, if you're going to keep saying paternity without saying it," Melissa turned on him. "Stop." Too late, because now he had done it too. Now it wasn't only Melissa rushing to deny the biological question before I had squarely put it on the table. It was Daniel. The new guy. The man on the form. The man in my daughter's medical line. That was when the curb really went cold for me. Not because I had proof. I still didn't, but because two people now seemed more concerned with getting ahead of the implication than answering the ordinary administrative wrongness of the document itself. I looked at Brenda. She was no longer writing. She was looking directly at Melissa, and that was when I knew the exchange had crossed from ugly into usable. Melissa knew it too. You could see it in the way her shoulders pulled back. Not bigger, just firmer, like she had realized the curb was no longer a place where tone could save her. Brenda did not say a word. She didn't need to. The paper was in her hand. Daniel had now said the forbidden word before I had cleanly used it, and Melissa was left trying to drag the conversation back into something clerical, while every sentence she chose kept making it sound more personal. Ava said a little louder this time, "Can I please go now?" That cut through all of us. Melissa reached for the back door. Yes, baby, go with Dad. But Ava didn't move immediately. She looked at me first, then at Melissa, then at Daniel. I hated that sequence more than anything that had happened so far. Not because it proved anything, because it showed how many adult meanings were already sitting in her head where a child should have only had pickup routines and snack questions. I opened the back door myself. "Come on." She climbed out with the reading folder hugged to her chest and her backpack half-zipped. I took the bag from her, slung it over my shoulder, and set her behind me by instinct. That changed the geometry again. Soft shift. Not just three adults at a curb now, but a father physically moving his kid out of the center of a live argument. Brenda clocked it. Melissa clocked it. Daniel definitely clocked it. Melissa said, "You're being dramatic." I almost laughed. "I'm getting her out of earshot. You're making this bigger than it is." "No," I said. "You keep doing that all by yourself." Ava tugged at my sleeve. "Dad?" I crouched down enough to meet her face without taking my eyes fully off the other two. "Walk up to the fence and wait by Miss Ortega, okay?" She nodded, too fast, and moved toward the crossing guard with the relieved little half-run kids do when adults finally give them a path out of something bad. Miss Ortega saw her coming and put a hand lightly on her shoulder without asking questions. Good woman. When I stood again, Melissa's whole expression had changed. Not softer, more dangerous. The maternal layer was gone for the moment. What was left was the co-parent who knew the conversation had shifted from improvisable hurt to something that could actually be cited. "You are not sending her to your lawyer," she said. Brenda answered before I could. "She's with the crossing guard." Melissa turned on her. "I wasn't speaking to you." Brenda said, "That's fine." That might have been the coldest sentence anyone had said all day. Authority pressure doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it only needs a person who refuses to help you soften your own wording. Melissa hated that. I could tell. She had spent years dealing with me in private where every disagreement could be re-narrated later as my tone problem or my timing problem or my inability to let things go. Brenda's presence made narration harder. I said, "So let's try this again." "Why family?" Melissa rubbed her wrist again. "Because intake asked who he was to her, and you said family." "Yes." "Why?" "Because he is part of her daily life." Daniel stepped in. "And because the receptionist was moving fast and didn't care about your politics." I turned to him. "My politics?" He spread one hand, trying for reasonable. "You want to hear the ugliest possible version of everything. We were at urgent care with a sick kid." Melissa picked the easiest word. That was plausible enough to be irritating. I could imagine it. I could imagine a parent blurting family because it keeps the line moving and avoids explaining boyfriend to a receptionist who has already asked the same question 14 times that hour. But plausible is not the same as innocent, and it definitely wasn't enough to explain why Melissa had leapt to paternity on instinct. I said, "Then why did she say again?" Melissa's face closed over. "Because you've made comments." "What comments?" She gave me a tired look. "You really want me to quote you at the curb?" "Yes." Brenda's pen moved again. Melissa saw it and went still. "This is insane." "No," I said. "This is paperwork." She looked at Daniel, then back at me. You asked once if Ava's blood type had been entered wrong on a school form. I actually blinked at that, because she was right, I had asked, not as an accusation. More as one of those late-night side questions that come out wrong after too much stress and too little trust. Ava's school health form had listed O positive last year. I'm O negative. Melissa had laughed, called the office incompetent, and the corrected copy showed up 2 days later. I let it go because clerical errors happen and because I knew how bad it would sound if I didn't. But yes, the thought had passed through me. Once, quietly, shamefully, Melissa kept going. And at spring registration, you made that joke about Daniel being here more than the forms say. That wasn't a joke. Exactly. That landed because it was true. I had said it half smiling, which is the cheapest way to smuggle a real question into public and then pretend you aren't starting something. She wasn't wrong about that. If somebody later told me I had been inching toward this topic for months and now wanted to pretend the curb had sprung it on me from nowhere, I would not be able to deny it cleanly. But old fear is not the same as permission for what she did. I said, so because I clocked the creep of him into our kid's life, you decided to make it official on a clinic form. Melissa's voice sharpened. No, because I was handling a fever, insurance, medication, and a front desk asking questions while you were 30 minutes away. I was 12 minutes away. It felt longer. There it is again. Daniel sighed. You hear everything as intent. I hear enough. That was maybe the truest sentence I said all day. Because enough is what these situations are built out of. Not proof, not closure. Enough. Enough strange wording. Enough over-defending. Enough male presence sliding into a child-linked space under the label family. Enough biological denial arriving before the actual biological question is fully spoken. Enough for the curb to feel contaminated, even if no judge would call it resolved. Melissa crossed her arms. What exactly do you want me to say? The plain part. There isn't one plain part. That was honest. Also infuriating, because she was right. The situation had become a nest of ugly possibilities instead of one clean fact. Maybe Daniel was only over-involved, and Melissa was only sloppy with titles. Maybe she had been emotionally rearranging Ava's world around him before she admitted it to herself. Maybe the paternity line jumped out of her because she knew how this looked, not because there was some deeper biological doubt. Maybe there was. By then, the problem was not that I knew too much. It was that I knew enough to hate every possible version. Brenda closed the legal pad and said, Finally, Melissa, are you refusing to correct the medical contact hierarchy going forward? Melissa looked at her like she'd been slapped. That is not your question. It is now. Beautiful, calm, exact. No moral language. Just one institutional question that would sit in a file far better than all our bleeding human context. Melissa said, Of course I'll correct it. Good, Brenda said. And relationship. Melissa's jaw flexed. Fine, Daniel muttered. This is unbelievable. Brenda looked at him. No, it's specific. That shut him up. For a second, the whole curb felt newly ordered. Not fixed, ordered. The form would be corrected. The word family had become indefensible in legal language. The school exchange was moving around us again. Cars advanced. The whistle blew. Ava stood by the fence with Miss Ortega and watched the ground. And then Melissa made the mistake that turned the whole thing back from administrative to personal. She said, To me, and not Brenda, you still don't get to use one bad form to rewrite what you already know. I looked at her. What do I already know? She met my eyes and said nothing. That silence was worse than any answer she had given yet. That silence did more damage than the form, not because it proved anything cleanly, because it suggested there was a version of events Melissa believed I had already absorbed, without either of us being brave enough to name it first. The difference matters. People think betrayal only arrives when someone says the thing out loud. Most of the time, it arrives earlier, when both people realize they have been speaking around the same fear for months, and one of them finally weaponizes the other's caution. I said, No, go ahead. Melissa looked toward Ava at the fence, then at Brenda, then back at me. Not here. That's convenient. It's responsible. Daniel said, "She's right." I turned on him. "You keep telling me what's responsible like you're her husband." That landed hard enough that he actually looked away. Good. Maybe unfair. Maybe not. By then, he had spent the entire exchange doing what only intimate people do in family disputes, entering sentences before the original relationship can finish them. He had no legal standing, no biological title, no reason to be anything more than a quiet escort on a fever trip. But he was already moving through our custody language like somebody rehearsing a role he thought he would eventually deserve. Melissa said, "Don't do that. Then stop letting him." Her face hardened. "You're trying to make him the whole story because you don't want to look at the part you already know." Again, the part I already know. Brenda did not move, but I could feel her attention sharpen beside me. Authority pressure again, colder now. Less about the form, more about whether this exchange was about to hand her something she couldn't unhear. I kept my voice flat. "Spell it." Melissa closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. "You've been circling this since before the separation." That's not a sentence. It's the only one you're getting in front of her school. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Melissa only gets this principled about setting when the truth under discussion disadvantages her more than me. She had no problem introducing paternity at the curb when it served as a way to paint me unstable. But now that I wanted the actual shape of what she meant, suddenly she was defending Ava's hearing and the sanctity of pickup. I said, "You already broke the setting." She flinched at that. Tiny. Real. Daniel stepped forward half a pace. "This is over," Brenda said without looking at him. "No, it isn't." That changed the air again. He stopped. Brenda stayed where she was, legal pad against her side. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just the only adult on the curb who was no longer pretending this could still be talked back into normal. Melissa hated that more every second. I could see it. She could fight me. She knew how. She did not know how to fight paperwork attached to a witness who never over-explained. I said, "Did you ever correct anybody when they assumed he was Ava's father?" Melissa stared at me. There it was. That question had been in the room since the first form line, maybe since spring registration, maybe since even before that, if I was honest. It sounded grotesque now, because it was finally naked. But once it was asked, everything before it rearranged itself around the possibility that Melissa's problem was not just sloppy intake language. It was tolerance, comfort with confusion, maybe even utility. "No," she said. Brenda's pen moved. Melissa saw it and snapped. "Not because of what you're implying." "Then why?" I asked. "Because strangers make assumptions. I don't stop every single one." That was believable enough to sting. Plenty of mothers with new partners do exactly that. They don't correct every cashier, every receptionist, every parent at soccer, every urgent care clerk, not because they're hiding paternity fraud. Because life is busy and strangers are not owed family essays. I knew that. Brenda knew that. Melissa knew we both knew it. The issue was not whether strangers guessed wrong. The issue was whether she had started enjoying the wrong guess. I said, "Did you ever let him answer as if he was?" "No." Too fast. Daniel looked at the curb. Not at me, not at Melissa. Down. That was enough to keep the doubt alive. Maybe he was just embarrassed. Maybe he was furious at me for asking. Maybe there had been one harmless, stupid office park moment at a pharmacy window where he nodded to keep a line moving. Those things happen. They also matter when you're standing on a school curb holding a clinic form that says family. Melissa said, "You are twisting everything." "No," I said. "I'm pinning it down." "That's the same thing to you, maybe." That thought hit me and stayed. Because it was not entirely wrong. I do pin until things flatten. I do hear one bad clue and run every prior memory through it like a metal detector. That is one of the reasons Melissa and I failed long before Daniel stood at any curb. If someone later said I was so desperate for one clean answer that I made a bureaucratic mess carry more than it truly could, they would not be inventing me from scratch. But Melissa was still the one who wrote family. Melissa was still the one who said paternity before I did. Melissa was still the one who kept implying I already knew something, while refusing to state it. I said, "Then tell me what you think I know." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Ava. That pause made me colder than anger would have. Because if there were nothing there, she would have said it. Not proven it, maybe, but said it. Said, "You know nothing. You are humiliating yourself. Stop." Instead, she gave me the kind of silence people use when they know the full denial is unavailable to them for reasons they cannot explain without making the next hour worse. Brenda said carefully, "Melissa, if there is any biological uncertainty relevant to future filings, you need counsel, not a curb." Melissa whipped around to her. "There is not." That came out fast enough to almost help. Almost. Except Daniel still had not looked up, and Melissa still had not answered why she kept acting as if I was late to some truth instead of inventing it whole. I said, "Then why do you sound like I'm stupid for even asking?" "Because of how you ask." That one landed, because it was probably true in the narrowest possible way. I do ask like a man trying to corner language. I do keep going after everyone else wants the room back. And yes, that can make even a fair question sound like an attack. But good questions asked badly are still questions. I said, "Did Ava ever hear him called her father?" Melissa said, "No." Daniel said at the same time, "No." This time the matching answer felt less reassuring, not more, like they'd arrived at the same door too quickly. Again, maybe unfair, maybe they were both simply telling the truth. That was the rot all through the exchange. Every harmless version remained possible, but only if I ignored how hard they were both working to get ahead of the ugliest reading before I had fully committed to it. Ava looked over from the fence then, just one quick glance, and I felt sick immediately. We were running out of curb, running out of socially survivable time. Melissa knew it too. She lowered her voice. "If you want to keep going, file it. But don't do this to her on a pickup line." That was the smartest sentence she'd said all day. Not because it cleared her, because it shifted the ground from live injury to procedure, where I had far less room to look righteous and far more room to be evaluated. Courts don't care how it felt when the paper came out of the backpack. They care what can be demonstrated without drama. Melissa was finally back on ground she trusted. Brenda heard it too. "Then we're done for today." No one argued with her. That should have ended it. Instead, Melissa took one step closer to me and said, low enough that Brenda had to lean in to catch it, "You still know why this idea never leaves you." I looked at her, and for the first time all day, I realized the next damage might not be in the paperwork at all. It might be in what she was about to remind me of from our marriage. I knew exactly what she was reaching for before she said it. Not because I'm a mind reader, because there are only so many old knives people save for moments like that, and Melissa had always been best at picking the one that made me question my own motive, right when I was closest to forcing hers into daylight. She said, "You know this idea never leaves you because of the timeline around Ava's birth, and because you never forgave me for the overlap at the end." Brenda didn't interrupt. Daniel went very still. Ava stayed by the fence with Miss Ortega, kicking one sneaker against the curb edge and pretending to count leaves. The overlap at the end. There it was. Not named cleanly. Not affair. Not cheating. Not paternity. Just the history we had both spent years dragging around in different language. Melissa and I were already breaking when Daniel became more than a friend. That was her version. Mine was that she let the end blur because it was easier to tell herself she was reaching for stability than admitting she had started transferring loyalty before the marriage fully died. Both versions could live in the same ruined house, which was part of why this day felt so filthy. I said, "You want to use the end of our marriage to justify a clinic form?" "No." "Then don't. I'm trying to remind you that you've been carrying this question a long time. That doesn't make the paperwork less wrong. It makes your certainty less clean." That landed because it was true enough to sting. My certainty was not clean. Nothing about me on that curb was clean. I had carried the question, quietly, badly, with shame, with half-jokes and old blood-type thoughts I'd hated myself for. I had let it live in me because I never had enough to survive saying it whole, and because some part of me feared what would happen if I ever got enough to start. Melissa knew that. She had just said it out loud without using the ugliest word. And in doing so, she had shifted the battlefield one last time, from what she did to what she had always known about me. Brenda finally spoke. Melissa, that is not a curb conversation either. Melissa looked at her and laughed once, dry and tired. No, but apparently this whole day stopped qualifying as one a while ago. For the first time, I almost agreed with her, because maybe she was right about that. Maybe the clinic form was just the object that finally forced into one frame everything we had both been refusing to line up. Daniel's creeping role, the weird comfort with family, the old overlap at the end of the marriage, my own failure to either bury the biological fear or face it properly. All of it had arrived at once under a sycamore line, while second graders carried art projects past my car. I said, "Did you ever have doubt?" That was the question. Not implied. Not half buried. Melissa stared at me. Brenda's pen did not move this time. Even she knew the room had crossed into something else now, something that would not belong in notes unless it came out whole. Melissa said slowly, "No." I waited. She held my gaze. "No," she said again. "I never had doubt about who Ava's father is." Daniel looked up finally. Not because he was relieved, because the sentence had been said and he could now safely exist again inside the smaller scandal of the form. I believed, Melissa believed what she was saying. That is not the same thing as peace, because certainty, spoken after years of bad timing, sloppy overlap, and administrative betrayal, does not arrive on fresh ground. It arrives after the trust soil has already been turned. I did not think she was lying in that exact moment. I thought she was a woman who had spent too long deciding which truths could be postponed without changing shape, and now expected one clean answer to repair a dozen older choices. I said, "Then why let it get this close?" Her face cracked a little then. Not tears, weariness, because every time I tried to explain the end, you heard biology instead of behavior. That was a brutal sentence, and probably the most honest one she gave me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had taken the overlap at the end of the marriage, the emotional leakage, the way Daniel appeared too quickly, the way Melissa's loyalty shifted before our paperwork did, and let that mutate into a deeper question, because the deeper question hurt in a cleaner way. Paternity doubt is terrible, but it is neat. Emotional betrayal is messier. It forces you to admit that maybe the child is yours, and the relationship still rotted in ways you didn't catch until too late. Brenda said evenly, "The document still needs correcting." Melissa nodded. "It will be. Today." "Yes." Daniel finally spoke again, softer now. "I'll step back on anything medical." I looked at him. That should have sounded decent. It didn't. It sounded like a man retreating from a line he never should have crossed while still hoping everyone would notice how calm he was about retreating. Maybe that was unfair. Maybe he had only ever been over-helpful and stupid, not deceitful. But calm men standing in the wrong place always benefit from ambiguity more than the people they displaced. I said, "You don't get to volunteer terms for my kid." He nodded once. "Fair." That might have been the first truly useful sentence from him all day. Melissa said, "I'm not giving you a paternity test because of a clinic form." Brenda cut in immediately. "No one asked for one." Melissa looked at me. "You were about to." I didn't answer, because maybe I had been. Not verbally, but in the back of my mind, at the ugly far edge of where the exchange was headed, yes. She knew it. I knew it. That silence between us was probably the dirtiest thing on the curb. She exhaled and said, "That's what I mean." Maybe it was. Maybe she had just won the moral split in one stroke by making my silence stand where her history had been standing all day. Or maybe I had simply refused to give her a softer version of my fear after she had spent years giving me softened versions of her own truth. Ava called, "Dad?" Just that. One word. Enough. Everything snapped back into scale. Not healed, not solved, just resized around the fact that there was a child by the fence waiting for the adults to pick one universe and function inside it. I went to her, not theatrically, not because I had decided anything final, because she needed to leave a curb and I was still her father, whether the day had clarified anything or only made it filthier. I took her backpack fully onto my shoulder. She slipped her hand into mine like she always did when she sensed tension she couldn't name. When I turned back, Melissa was already talking to Brenda in that clipped, legal-adjacent tone. People adopt when they realize emotion has stopped helping. Daniel stood off to the side, no longer touching my car, no longer saying family, finally looking like what he should have looked like all day. Extra. Brenda said, "We'll expect the corrected clinic record and updated contact hierarchy through counsel." Melissa nodded. "You'll have it. No apology, no softening, just paperwork now." That was the incomplete ending of it. Not resolution. Conversion. A personal horror shifted into documented procedure because that was the only shape the system would accept. I opened Ava's door and buckled her in myself. She asked if we were still getting fries on the way home. I said yes. My voice sounded normal. That frightened me more than anything else had, how easily normal came back when a child needed it. Before I shut the door, I looked once more at Melissa. She looked tired, angry, and absolutely certain that I had made the day uglier than it needed to be. I probably had. She also looked like someone who knew the form had gone farther than a clerical shortcut and had finally cost her the benefit of being believed first. Brenda was still writing. Daniel had no place left to stand that did not look chosen. And me? I drove away with my daughter in the back seat. Fries promised, a lawyer already drafting next steps, a corrected medical record coming through counsel, and the worst question not fully dead, even after Melissa answered it. That is the poison of days like that. Sometimes you get a direct answer and still don't get relief, because the real betrayal was never only about blood. It was about how many ways another man had been moved into my child's orbit while I was being told I was dramatic for noticing. By that night, Brenda had emailed me a summary of the exchange and a note that we could address the contact issue immediately, but anything biological would require a much more serious decision than a curbside panic should ever make. She was right. Melissa sent one message through the parenting app. Form will be corrected. Do not do this around her again. Daniel sent nothing. I stared at Melissa's line for a long time. Do not do this around her again. As if I had been the event. As if the paperwork, the family label, the paternity leap, the years of bad timing and blurred loyalty and forced calm, all of that had merely set the table for my reaction. That was the part that stayed with me. Not proof. Not certainty. Just the fact that once the clue surfaced, everyone around me immediately started negotiating how much of my response they could treat as the real problem. And that is how these things stay incomplete. The form gets corrected. The lawyer gets her notes. The curb empties. The child gets fries. But the air never really goes back to before.